Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is John Kingston, and I am the Executive Editor at FreightWaves. We are happy to be presenting this webinar in partnership with SmartDrive, which focuses on solutions and intelligence that are designed to maximize fleet safety and operational efficiency. I'm glad to have you with us for today's webinar, which will focus on driver retention. Before we get started, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. First, we'll be sending out the presentation deck and a recording of this webinar in the next day or so. So if you're unable to join us for the whole session or would like to share the recording with your peers, we'll have it over to you soon. Also, if you have questions for us during the presentation, feel free to send those along through the chat function at the bottom or the top of your viewer. We will also leave time for some live questions from the audience during the last few minutes of the webinar, so feel free to send those along as they come to you. Now that the details are covered, let's dive into the content. I listened to numerous earnings calls in both the first and second quarters of this year, and mixed in with the discussions of financial results, which were overwhelmingly positive, of course, was a significant amount of time spent discussing the market for drivers. It's not even universally agreed what to call it. The shorthand term that almost everybody uses is driver shortage, but even that term can be controversial. In particular, OOIDA, the organization that represents independent owner-operators, objects to that term. Their view is that the only things that are short are the wages and other incentives needed to bring new drivers into the fold. It aligns with what I was told as a young reporter covering commodity markets to never use the word shortage, and for much the same reason that I believe OOIDA has said. There is no such thing as a shortage, just a price for a good or a service that is either providing too much supply or not enough. At FreightWaves, we try to use the term driver squeeze, but I'm sure the term driver shortage is going to be heard today. The basis for today's conversation is a driver retention survey geared to people who very much have their ears on the ground. The first is Gordon Klemp, the president of the National Transportation Institute, whose company regularly surveys the driver market about compensation and whose findings are considered one of the industry benchmarks. Well, our other guest is Mike Paz. Mike is the director of safety at Fraley & Schilling, an Indiana-based trucking company that works in partnership with SmartDrive. In fact, I am in Indiana right now with Mike. Mike's most recent area of responsibility before his current position was as director of recruiting, so he knows the field well. Before we get into the results of the survey, I'm going to ask each of them to talk a little bit about their views on the market, their views on driver retention, and what they found in their own experiences. So we're going to first of all, let me go down a little bit on the slides because we're going to go to Gordon. Gordon, here's a slide discussing some of your views on driver retention and the driver squeeze. Can you talk about them?
Certainly, John, and welcome everybody. Just wanted to mention a couple things in starting. 23 years ago when we started surveying driver pay, it was the anticipation that drivers were eventually going to grow short based on what the dynamics were in the market in 1994 and 95. And that played out right on schedule till we hit 2000. And in 2000, the economy made a pretty big shift. By 2001, and for the next 16 years, we averaged 1.9% average growth in GDP. And we also only had 2 quarters in there where we had back-to-back 3% plus changes in GDP. So went through a long, dry period of declining GDP, which masked a continuing deterioration in the driver supply since GDP and freight are so correlated, and the fact that at the same time carriers were moving into a much more technological advanced state, and it was masking with increased efficiency the fact that drivers were retiring and not being attracted to this market anymore. When we began this year, actually, in our terms, the year began in December because that's when we marked the real change in driver pay starting. We saw it as a seminal year because we believed, and it's played out, if the economy stayed any place near 3%, it would result in a very serious shortage of drivers, and we'd be scrambling as an industry. So far, that's playing out on cue, and in just simple terms, we don't see a point in the future where we solve this problem. It is one that's going to be with us for a long time. That's evidenced by the fact that we have, for the first time, a cycle, a pay cycle that began. The first moves we saw that we thought were significant, and we started a new pay cycle, were in December of 17. A pay cycle historically has lasted more than 30 months. And by that, I mean from the first moves to the last moves. We're going to complete this one in about 10. So that gives you an idea of the kind of shortage we're looking at. It's good news in one way, bad news in another way, because drivers are going to be increasingly hard to get. Next slide that I have here is going to take a look at where we are in some of the macro things that we have to deal with. And the first is that, and the graph on the right side there is showing the unemployment statistics since 2008. Clearly, one of the things we've seen is employment drop now to roughly 4%. And that number is probably going to stay in the threes and the fours. We've kept people coming out of unemployment status, people who haven't been seeking a job, now looking for jobs. But once again, in the latest report that was issued this morning, and I believe it was Bureau of Labor Statistics, we have more open jobs than we have candidates for jobs. And so we're going to be in a position here where we're having trouble not only finding jobs for drivers, or not jobs for drivers, drivers to fill jobs. We're going to have a problem. We can't even probably find people to consider driving because they're all employed. So we've got a real touchy situation on our hands here. And we don't think it'll solve itself very quickly. One of the things that history teaches us that, in fact, money and innovation will come charging to a big problem to solve it, and we expect that to happen. We just don't know what that's going to look like, and it's hard for us to understand how it can happen in a period of less than 2 or 3 years, simply because the cycle is going to involve creating interest in people who haven't considered driving as a job, getting them trained, getting them enough experience driving a heavy-duty truck to be insurable, and then placing them into the workforce. So it's not a matter of having a lot of people who are holding CDLs, have the right experience, and are insurable. It's a matter of making all that happen from starting with the idea, yeah, I think I'd like to drive a truck. So we've got that problem, and good illustration is the fact that we don't see unemployment changing a lot, so there's not going to be a lot of people available. Our next slide talks about the change we've seen so far. We have seen in the first period, the first 2 quarters, that the truckload carriers in Q1 and Q2, 59.1% of them change pay. That's unprecedented in terms of speed of pay. It's also unprecedented in the fact that we've seen pay changes that are substantially outside the parameters we would have normally seen, and about 6% of those, which we'll talk about a little bit later. We think 99% of it's going to be over by the end of December. And so we've got a very, very short pay cycle. We don't have all our Q3 changes in yet, nor have we're looking at it, obviously, and I'd probably say we're probably going to be in the 70 to 80% range of completing the cycle when we look at the end of third quarter. The other thing that's happened is we've seen a lot of people move multiple times. We're seeing people move as many as 3 times so far this year, and they're in all different phases of trucking. I made some examples here. It's Anderson Trucking, a flatbed, primarily a flatbed carrier. It's Atlantic Bulk. It's Barnon. It's Celadon, Covenant, Crete, Bowman, KLM. So it's kind of across the board, and including some of the real surprising ones where we have Red Classic down there, and that's a division of Coca-Cola, and it's very highly unusual to see a private fleet do multiple changes in a year. That's quite unusual. So it's indicative of the situation we're in, and we think it's going to carry over into 2018. Base mileage rates are in the high 40s and mid 50s are not unusual now. That's creeping up substantially. Plus incentives for experienced drivers. And I know we're going to talk more about that later. Team drivers, we've got team pay 72 cents in the peak markets for over the road and 84 cents for regional teams, up substantially. The environment continues to heat up, shallow pool of experienced qualified drivers, difficulty getting hiring and retention goals met. Minimum experiences requirements are being reduced, and that's a long time thing. Perks we haven't seen in years, like pet and rider policies, are back in vogue, and they went away entirely. Pet policies, we didn't have one that we could report for probably 7 or 8 years. Now they're widespread. Digital marketers, digital marketing of the high earnings and impacting 0 to 120 day drivers, trying to attract people to this industry and to particular fleets. Mounting expenses to get in front of drivers are driving up costs. At the same time, it's more difficult to get in. The good news is the next part of that is that really rates are going up and they're supporting it. Perks are on the rise. Per diem is pretty well growing very rapidly right now under the new tax plan. We think it'll continue to grow simply because drivers will be visiting their tax man next April and finding out that if they don't have a company provided per diem plan, their deductibility went away. Minimum pay is going up, and it's been here for a while, but it's starting to grow pretty rapidly. The average now is about $1,000 a week, but we're seeing new plans out every month that are in the $1,200 to $1,600 a week guarantee range, which is a substantial increase in terms of putting some pretty big numbers out in front of drivers and potential drivers. Our next slide is something we found. We've been doing the survey since 1995-96, and we've always found two categories of payers, kind of neatly divided, about 50% apiece, and strong payers and what we would call 50th percentile payers, so 50th on down. But this second quarter emerged, and it started in the first quarter. We've got a very strong payer category, and it got up to 6.25% of the total pay move. So we thought we ought to break it out into a separate category. And if you take a look, and we did this in terms of cents per mile. There's other ways we could have done it on projected W-2 income, but it all kind of sorts out the same. And in the bottom 50th percent of payers, we saw the moves between 1 and 3 cents per mile, and it broke exactly 50%. The strong payers made up 43.75%, and they moved 4 to 6 cents. This very strong payer group moved 7 to 11 cents per mile, one move. And some of the people in the strong payer group and some of the people in the 50th percentile group have made second and some cases third moves. So by the end of the year, we'll see if that very strong payer hasn't merged back in with the other group. But it would appear, at least based on our preliminary third quarter data, that's probably not going to happen in the third quarter. So we've gone from kind of a bifurcated market to a trifurcated market on pay. We don't know how long that'll be around. The market will probably make some effort to correct that because those spreads are going to be pretty substantial. Represent roughly $3,000 to $6,000 of earnings. So that's pretty substantial. My next slide indicates another thing that has been going on for, well, some time, and time eternal not, but for a long time, and that is simply the return of sign-on bonuses. And it started with a fairly small group. They had totally gone away. We reported no sign-on bonuses from 2008 through 2010. And in 2012-13, some of them started to creep back into the industry. And as you can see right now by trailer type, we're any place from the high 50s to the 70 percentile of carriers who are offering sign-on bonuses to drivers. Comment on that. One of the things you want to know is it a sign-on bonus or is it a performance bonus? Because they work together. We define a sign-on bonus, true sign-on bonus, as one that pays out in less than a year and doesn't require any specific activity other than doing a reasonable job. And buried in those numbers are a fair amount, I would say probably half, that have some other requirements to the driver. So they're not in our category a true sign-on bonus, but they're advertised as such. So we can see what's happened to the market. Nobody likes them, but everybody does them because it's once it starts, you're trying to protect your own turf and not be disadvantaged in recruiting a driver. So they're around probably for the foreseeable future, and they're big. Any place from $2,000 to $7,500 for a solo driver, and 10 to 30 for a team. And so they're big numbers. Next slide deals with some of the obstacles that we face in terms of solving the problem. There's a decided lack of excitement about a driving career. Part of it is, and the number one up there on our list is a little bit different than what's on other people's lists. But one of the things that turns people off about our jobs is it's a 55 to 70 hour week for lots of drivers. And if you look at the average American right now, that is their employment is in the high 30s per week or low 40s. So the job is not only one that's difficult physically, but it's a 55 to 70 hour work week. Extensive away from home travel in many of them, not all of them, but many. Unpredictable schedules, inconsistent work hours, i.e. Sometimes you work at night, sometimes you work during the day. There's no consistency in your work unless you're with a dedicated fleet, and then it gets better. Physically demanding labor, relatively low pay, lack of prestige. Let's move to the next slide, and we can take it to the next step. There we go. This one is, and let me explain. There's 5 elements we've isolated over time that drive driver pay. One of them is I can tell you this: for hire driver pay does not move unless freight rates are strong and going up. It doesn't happen. We've got 23 years of history. There's no instance where rates have gone up for hire drivers, and while freight rates have been soft, flat, or going down. So that explains part of the first line up there, for hire fleets. For hire fleets actually have a negative 0.25% correlation to inflation. In other words, they don't care about inflation either. It's all about freight rates. And so over the 2007 through 2017 10-year period, for hire income, and this is W-2 income, because remember, a driver's getting paid some sort of base, be it mileage, percentage of the haul, whatever, and along with some other things that go into their W-2. They only went up 8.74%. Private fleets, and we'll talk just a bit at the end about that, went up 18.9, which is almost identical to inflation. And that's the next bar down there. That's the CPIU, 19.9%. Minimum wage went up 43.1%. McDonald's, which was paying minimum wage in all areas in the country in 2007, is up 94.2%. Not that the driver would make more working for McDonald's, because that's not true, but the amount of change they've had in their W-2 is substantially different. So we've got a perception that it's low pay, slow pay, And as you can see in some of the years down there in the table, for-hire fleets went down, 2.4, 7.3, and 2.9%, 2.7% roughly. So that's an issue that over time we need to address. But right now it's part of the reasons why people don't get excited about driving a truck. And it also puts us in a very bad position because our position in 2007 with bringing somebody in and total income was a lot better than it is today. Our next slide, talk about the elephant. Okay, driver income changes. In our January forecast for this year, we forecast W-2 income, and let me be clear on this. That's the income that based on the change in driver pay and mileage over this year, a driver would be able to earn 11.8% more at the end of December or January 1st of 19 than he would have on January 1st of 18. And we try to do a spread. We're right about on target for that. And we think that's still a good number. We think the fall is going to be another period of strong change. We're going to see more second changes and in some cases third changes by carriers. So it's going to be a strong year. And like I say, this once again has nothing to do with inflation. It has to do with supply and demand relative to drivers and 4 other variables that we can identify. We can see it's a little bit different by area of the country, Northeast being the strongest, and the Southeast being the softest, but running from 6 to 8% right now, and we think that 11.8 is still a good number for the year end. The next slide is kind of the elephant in the room, because our view of 2019 is it's going to get real tough. And one of the reasons it's going to get real tough is that the biggest competitor that the for-hire world has are private fleets. And private fleets have always known where they're going to get their next driver. They were going to hire them well-trained and experienced from a for-hire fleet. And even the best payers in that industry are right now struggling to find drivers. And they are rethinking how they're going to do that. And they're probably going to bring a lot of money to the table for 2019. One big difference between a private fleet and a for-hire fleet is for-hire fleets are very agile. And they're also very sensitive to the freight rate thing. Everybody's got some money right now, but day after day, they pick and choose when they do it. Mid-year, whenever they need it, they're trying to do it to make it right. On the other hand, private fleets work on budgets. And their budgets are, in the process of being approved right now through probably the end of November. And in many cases, they show substantially increased expenditure for driver recruitment and pay. So I think we're going to see the private fleets come to the table next year with a vigor that we didn't see this year because it caught them by surprise. So that's the elephant in the room. Need to solve the big problem of drivers. But with that, we'll wrap this part of it up and hand this off to Mike.
Gordon, thank you very much. John Kingston again. I am going to turn it over to Mike, who's going to present the results of a real world, I won't call it experiment, but a real world look at how things went.
Thanks, John. And I will tell you, Gordon, looking at the information you presented, from a guy sitting in that seat every single day, the validity is amazing on the results that you guys have forecasted and that you're reporting on. When you look at Fraley and Schilling, which is a company here, Midwest Indiana, we're a company closing in right now, 500 drivers, 5 terminals. We do an assortment of things, be it flatbed, dry vans. We've been partnered with Smart Drive now for the last 3 years. It was a decision we made in our overall value that we place on safety, and also the commitment to drivers through our coaching, the ability to exonerate them. And as most companies out there today, we're looking for different technologies that will help us in the overall safety effort. about 6 years ago, we went ahead and made the jump well ahead of the timeline for electronic logs. We partner with several different companies to ensure that we're holding our drivers accountable, but at the same time ensuring that we're doing everything we can to safeguard not only our drivers, but the motoring public. Make no mistake, though, as Gordon had in his slides, and as most of you on this call are well aware, that drivers are still the most advanced technology in the truck. Drivers are at the forefront of everything we do, and that's certainly the case at Fraley and Schilling. Things that we do that we have seen driving results as regard to positive reinforcement is we've got to get everybody involved. Safety or the overall safety effort is not just a function of the safety department. You know, companies nowadays have to get everyone involved, whether it be operations, or it starts at the leadership, but operations, maintenance, and then the safety team obviously drives that home. Individuals have everything to gain and nothing to lose by owning the overall safety effort. Everyone wants to ensure the overall safety effort. Everyone is committed, I firmly believe, to the safety of the motoring public, and it takes everyone to do it. At Fraley and Schilling, the good news is that every member of our team is expected to make safety a daily practice. And that simply begins with promoting advocacy and ends up with rewarding compliance. Rewarding being obviously what we're going to focus on here shortly, and ensuring that we are communicating with drivers what's expected of them, and then simply holding them accountable for what needs to be done. We can't drive the truck for them. We've got to put our faith, trust, and confidence in them, and ensure that they're doing everything they can each and every day to do what needs to be done. At Fraley and Schilling, you know, what makes a great driver? It's multiple things, but at Fraley and Schilling, safety is a value. We asked the question very early on in the orientation process that is safety a value or is safety a priority? The answer to that is safety is a value. Priorities change. Values never change. Values are embedded in everything you do at every moment of the day. So safety is value-based. We measure that. Nothing as good as an old-fashioned measurement through our CSA scores, our partnership with Smart Drive, and our safety scores, which we'll look at here on how we do our scorecards, communicates to our drivers how we're doing and how we are committed to that. We want drivers, obviously, to get the job done efficiently. We are a trucking company, and obviously we're in business to make money. But at the same time, there are a lot of different things that go into that. Again, measuring our mileage, our load, our overall efficiency, our paperwork, our idle percentage. It helps us to determine how we are doing in the overall effort of running a trucking company. We see things continue to improve. Measurement of our safety score, our reduction over week to week. We identify every Monday, I send out our top 5 riskiest drivers, and I take that right off of the observations that we have seen on Smart Drive of things that need coached. And ironically, we send that out not only to the safety managers, but we also send that out to our fleet managers, our operations team, our terminal managers. So leadership, operations, and safety is joined together to coach, mentor, train, and do the things that we need to do to ensure the overall benefit of having a safe, qualified, efficient driver in the seats of our trucks. This slide here, and when I was in Chicago a few months ago at the Smart Drive conference, there were a lot of companies I spoke with afterwards that really liked this. This first slide I'm going to show you here is that, and this is a very actual, obviously names have been changed to protect identity, but this is a slide or a scorecard that we have operating in our company as we speak. Our leadership, and actually Ryan Schilling, an individual in our company who knows how to put all this together and make data appear. We send this out every week to our drivers. It's part of their settlements. So we've incorporated into pay. Obviously, the old-fashioned ways of making envelope stuffers or throwing stuff in drivers' inboxes for them to pick up when they get in is going to the wayside. So now you've got to come up with electronic ways to get the information out there and make sure everything's done along with their direct deposit. This slide here shows an individual where we're monitoring and 4 key metrics, how they equate in their production, their Smart Drive safety score, their CSA scores, and then their timeliness of turning in their paperwork. We can't get paid until we ensure that we get the documents to pay the stuff. So we monitor that. We hold drivers accountable. We measure it. And as you can see with this individual, and we use a simple, A, B, C, and D rating where they look at and see how they're doing. Drivers are very key on this. We've actually had drivers who will reach out to us and communicate on how they're doing. How can they get better? We're coming to us, talking to us on how they can improve their CSA scores, how they can improve their score, which it's a proactive approach instead of a reactive approach to engaging the drivers in their commitment for safety excellence. And oh, by the way, through production. Drivers are competitive. I mean, human nature, that competitiveness, when you see that you're falling short, it allows you to determine how you can improve and engages that partnership and that communication between all levels of management and all levels of participation.
Mike, I'm going to interrupt a little bit. I'm fascinated by this slide. What I'm seeing in the bottom left corner, the top 10 pay types in the last 12 weeks, would that be not just for this individual, but through the whole company?
That's just for that individual.
So, okay, so that person in the last 12 weeks had earned $10,517 on driving, and then these other categories, that's what they had earned.
That is correct.
Okay, fascinating.
That's correct. So there's one that top of the line. We want to show you the other side of the fence. What makes a good driver? As a safety director, I have to stop people in their tracks sometimes and say, it's not always about production. Sure, we want a driver that goes out there and makes things happen and gets the job done. But first and foremost, the most important thing we do at Fraley and Schilling, and I think that could be said for any trucking company, is we get our drivers safely home to their families. That's the key of success. So while this driver is certainly knocking it out of the park in regards to production, you can see that in regards to his Smart Drive safety score, which he's got a 12-week score of 71. That's above our metric of 60. Our sweet spot that we found is 60. And when we get drivers and our terminals and our overall company at 60 or below, we find that not only are we a safer company, but we're also a more compliant and more productive. This driver's CSA is well below the expected standard, and so he knows that. We've communicated that, and he knows what he needs to do and is cognizant of it out there and making good decisions each and every day. And then obviously the paperwork submission, we see that and we know what we're doing there. As far as rewards, and when I heard Gordon, and I was just astounded at again, the validity and the accuracy of what he was reporting on, we're trying to find innovative ways to not only reward but recognize our drivers and partner with them. A lot of companies are out there doing the same thing. As you've just seen, our scorecard performance bonus program is not only keyed towards production, but as well as safety and production. We've had annual safety bonuses. I've been with the company now for 10 years, and since I joined the team in 2008, we've actually paid out annual safety bonuses to our drivers and independent contractors who earn them. And then something that we have done in recent months, basically Q4 of 2017, and with a focus on 2018, is our recognition. Finding drivers who go above and beyond, not only in their safety efforts, but in all assets of driving a truck, and that's driven through CSA and giving drivers the ability to make their own pathway. We're putting the onus on the team effort, and yet communication, coaching, and development, so that we can ensure that, while there is a need for drivers in the industry and we're all competing for the same drivers, we feel that when we do find them and we orient them and we train them, now we want to hold on to them. We want to make sure that we're doing the things through our recognition efforts and through our pay and benefits to hold on to those drivers and keep them a member of the Fraley and Schilling team. Results, it's all about the results. What we've seen over the last 3 years through our partnership with Smart Drive and in the last 12 to 16 months since we've been doing this, we have seen a reduction in our accident frequency rate. Obviously, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration holds the safety effort in a tight measurement. You don't want to be caught not doing what you're supposed to do. Since our efforts have gone into place, we've seen a 55% reduction in our accident frequency rate. That's per million miles. We've seen a 50% reduction in our DOT reportable accidents. Last year, 2017, was our implementation of Smart Drive. Year one in 2016 was a tough year just because we had to get drivers. We used the sports analogy, like, here in Indiana, there's nobody to study film, and we use golfers who look at their same thing with drivers. Drivers can look at what they're doing, and it wasn't a gotcha campaign. It wasn't an effort to weed out the best, or the worst of the worst, what have you, who have drivers' best interests at heart. As a result, we've seen the responses. We've seen a 10% reduction in our self-insured retention costs. We've added last year $2 million to our bottom line, and I firmly believe with our ownership, a lot of that had to do with our implementation of our Smart Drive partnership. Obviously, the bottom line is more money equals more pay into the driver's pockets. In looking at the economic summit that the ATA had last year and results I've seen from our leadership that was there, obviously, freight rates are out of the park right now. That's causing us and every other company out there to spend more money. But at the same time, when you are able to put internal efforts into place, you're obviously able to spend it on your teammates, which is money well spent. In closing, its safety results are driven by the company's culture. In 2018, I took my team on a year of really developing our culture of safety. We're a value-based company, but our value that we place on safety has got to be part of our DNA, part of our company's culture. Again, it has to be a value, not a priority. Positive reinforcement gets everyone involved. The carrot and the stick mentality where, yes, you're going to hold drivers accountable. I'm an old retired Army guy. And I tell drivers, I'll be the first one to pat you on the back for a job well done. I'll be the first one to give you a boot in the backside, when you need it. And sometimes, well, let's just face it, nobody's perfect. We start with promoting advocacy, and we end with rewarding compliance. That's what it takes. And when we do that, good things happen. Each individual team member at Fraley and Schilling accepts personal responsibility. When a company does that, obviously the outcomes are better. You're a more safer company. As demonstrated, you're a more productive company, and ultimately, you're more profitable.
All right, very good, Mike. And Gordon, thanks a lot. Of course, as usual, the clock always flies faster than you want. We've got 20 minutes. I see I've got 3 questions from the outside lined up. So we're going to go rather rapidly through these. These are not the results of all of the questions in our survey, which I believe will be available in what's being sent out to all the people who signed up for this. So let's go kind of real quick, one by one. Is the driver shortage affecting your fleet? And I think the most astounding number is that no, actually cracked percent. What sort of companies might not be affected by a driver shortage? Is there any sort of group? Of course, I hear UPS always has more applications than it can possibly handle. But in general, are there any areas that are doing well? Gordon, you might still be on mute. All right, Mike, I'll ask you. Do you know any particular, are you surprised that we cracked 20% on this question?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not surprised at it. Those companies like Fraley and Schelling, where the need for drivers is affecting the fleet, absolutely. It's part of our Tuesday morning meeting, our operations team. We measure not only what we've got coming in, but measure what's going out the back door. Something that every company's got to be looking at.
Okay. Gordon, you there?
Yeah. I'm not surprised either. There are some niches in there that are extremely well paid. People like they're hauling pharmaceuticals and things like that. They are somewhat insulated from the problem. Ammo and explosives, certain types of hazardous waste like nuclear. So there's some niches in there. There's also some locations in the country where the freights gone up first, so they've been a little bit interested or isolated and been hanging on to their drivers a little bit better. But that's still a pretty substantial percentage, 80%. Interestingly, that pretty much matches where we think we're going to end the third quarter on pay changes.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I violated the rule on calling it a driver squeeze on the title of this question. I used the term driver shortage. So I hope OI is not on the call. What tactics have you instituted to improve driver retention in your fleet? You see a pretty wide range of driver incentive programs, pay increases, revising routes. What are some of the ones, Gordon, that you think have worked the best beside pay?
Besides pay, I think programs like Mike talked about, I think they're absolutely dynamite. And I think they empower a driver to raise their own income. They get them engaged in the game. And they align the things that make a customer or shipper happy along with the company's goals. So you've got an alignment of the driver, the company, and the shipper, the driver, the company, all in one goal pocket. And I think that's very powerful stuff.
Okay. Mike, what else might we find in the other category?
Well, as Gordon mentioned, and it kind of took me away, for the first time ever, we now have a pet policy. We instituted that this year. We're 2 years into our passenger authorization policy. So the two biggest ones that I've seen at Fraley and Schelling, and ironically, as Gordon mentioned, for the first time, we've got passengers and we've got pooches out there right now.
So pet policy, I mean, I know I've seen pictures, let's say on Reddit. Of course, there's a very active truckers forum on Reddit. I remember seeing a post of drivers all posting the dogs that ride with them, but those were independents. So you're saying these are employees and now they can bring their dogs.
Company drivers, independent contractors alike.
Okay. Do you have a driver incentive program? Again, yes, no, kind of surprised that 30% plus would say no. Gordon?
I'm not. That's probably been a number where we've seen that in that range for a while. Probably in cases where they have a pure drop and hook business and people are running freight from point A to point B and pretty simple situation. So, however, I think that ought to be a lot lower because even in those situations, I think they're missing opportunities.
Okay. Next question. What does your driver incentive program include? So let me ask, Mike, let me ask you, there is a list here of 5 things. Do you do all 5 of these or which of those are particularly important to you?
Sign-on bonus we currently have. We've had for quite some time. We've seen inflections going in that. We've got our annual safety bonuses. We do have on-the-spot programs where we can do incentives, obviously recognition through safety awards and the things that you saw on our scorecard, and then performance-based is what we've added here in recent years. So, yeah, Fraley and Schelling is engaged in all of those on there.
Okay. Gordon, is there anything on this list that's missing that you find is being used quite a bit?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I think that covers it well.
Okay, what departments within your fleet are responsible for your driver incentive program? The comment I wanted to make is I've sat in many a forum about driver retention, and what I hear is that it's everybody's job. And what's I think notable in this is you look at the percentage numbers on this, and they're all kind of within shouting distance of each other. So, you work for a trucking company, Mike. Do you think everybody gets it that this is their job?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. I had a conversation on my way down to Kentucky yesterday with a fleet manager on a retention issue that we've got. And yeah, I look at this, and when everybody owns it, just like the safety effort on the retention side, you see incredible results.
Okay, Gordon, anything to add?
Yeah, I see that as being a spreading trend. I think if we went back 20 years, that would not be the case. But we've come a long ways.
Okay. If you could improve upon your driver incentive program, what changes would you make? Gordon, do any of these answers, I don't want to say that they surprise you, but do they line up with what you hear?
They line up. I do think that the more frequent bar down there is important. Talking to a lot of people over time, the more frequently you're able to reward people, the more impact it seems to have. You know, there was a time when the early programs were all annual, if you will, and that's just too far to keep a driver interested. So the more frequent, I'm guessing if we looked at that over time, that's growing, and it works better when it is more frequent than infrequent.
Well, I guess frequency is not just necessarily when you get paid, but Mike, you know, I was really impressed with your sheet that you showed before that the driver gets every week. It's very thorough, and I'm assuming the drivers like to know where they stand.
Communication is the key.
Okay. All right. Now I think we're going to go to live Q&A, which means I have to go up to this little part up here, and it's always interesting to see what people might have asked. I never know what's behind the door number one. Okay, Walmart, the gold standard in driver pay and benefits, recently announced their intent to overhaul the onboarding and compensation for their fleet as they add hundreds of new drivers. Will this action have any impact on the national fleet? I guess national being not the national Walmart fleet, but I'm guessing that this all has to do with just drivers in general. Gordon, you know, you study pay very closely, and what did you think of the Walmart move?
Well, Walmart's been a leader in truck pay for as long as they've been in the business, and they're currently in the neighborhood of for a first-year driver, they're probably about $15,000 a year higher than what the for-hire average would be. And
are those drivers getting paid per mile, or is that a flat fee, flat salary?
It's a combination. We've got most packages involve a number of things. One would be a major driver like pay per mile or percentage or per hour, if you will. There's activity pays like loading, unloading, starts, and that kind of stuff. There's incentives in another category, and there's milestones that would include things like your longevity, your accident-free, that sort of thing, your CSA score. So there's a number of different things, but they've been strong in all those elements, and so they have a very well balanced package. And I'll just speak of people in that group, which you know, there's other fleets like that. The big problem is the spread we have, because the for hire is going to have to chase that group that Walmart's in. Because at about 3 years, that difference goes from about 15,000 to 20. And so,
right, and do most Walmart drivers get home at night?
A high percentage of them get home weekly, and lots of them do see the house several times a week.
Okay. One of the issues I see is making. Oh, I'm getting a lot of questions here. With driver turnover, an industry issue, when you consider the cost of hiring a driver, where do you think the greatest expense comes from? Providing sign-on bonuses, providing CDL training and certification, recruiting, what else? I mean, the sign-on bonus is easy to measure. The others, I guess, can be measured, but they're not quite as stark. So what is, I was on a call the other day, and Eric Fuller, the CEO of US Express, said when a driver walks out the door, they've identified hard costs of $5,000. They've identified softer costs, usually about $12,000. What's the cost to bring on a new driver? Mike?
I agree. That's a measurement. We use $5,000 to $8,000. I think that the cost when you're looking at retention and what goes to the bottom line, it starts with the efforts to recruit, your marketing efforts, but the training. What we see, I mean, when you bring a driver in, and our orientation is a week long down in Knoxville, Tennessee, and a driver comes in and hotel rooms for the week, feeding them, through the week. I've got 3 individuals actively engaged in the overall training effort. So when you look at those costs involved with that, it mounts up very, very quickly. And so it is very key to ensure that we've got all efforts and all hands on deck to make sure that we are doing everything we can to retain them.
Okay. One of the issues I see is making trucking a way of life again. With unemployment rates down, and obviously the generation that kind of dropped off. But I know what the question is because we've talked about it a lot ourselves. You know, it's kind of very ironic that, you know, we're having this conversation a few days after the passing of Burt Reynolds. And people remember when, you know, the Smokey and the Bandit movies, and he had been a truck driver. Of course, he was riding across the country in some kind of souped up car. I never actually saw the movie, so I don't remember what he was driving. But, you know, that was in the 70s, the whole convoy thing and everything. And boy, that's really faded now. So I hate to say you're looking for a coolness aspect, but how do you make this more attractive in ways other than money?
Well, I think, you know, it's ironic that they ask that question. You know, here we are right smack dab in the middle of Driver Appreciation Week. That's going on right now. Yesterday, I spent my afternoon down in Gent, Kentucky, handing out water to drivers and just thanking them for their effort, whether they were Fraley and Schilling drivers or drivers from other companies. It's a true appreciation. And I know from my background, being a veteran of 21 years in the United States Army, I have found that drivers are incredibly patriotic, and they truly are the backbone of America. And just going out there and demonstrating your appreciation, understanding, as Gordon mentioned, that these are individuals who have long days. They spend a lot of time away from their families. In the flatbed world that we operate in, I like to consider that the special forces of trucking, because these individuals are throwing heavy chains, tarps, binders, and it's just a simple way of making sure that every opportunity, whether it be the safety team, the operations team, or the executives, to thank drivers for what they do. At Fraley and Schilling, you know, not just 1 week that we celebrate drivers. We try to do it, you know, each and every day and each and every week, but just thanking them for what they do and the sacrifices that they make.
You know, maybe it's because I don't know whether it's because I'm relatively new to this field, so I notice it more, but it does seem that the national media has really picked up on the trucking story. The idea that there's a real squeeze. Of course, it's hard not to, you know, if you're a business reporter, you've sat in on conference calls of all sorts of shippers that have said, you know, this is really squeezing our profits. And there just seems to be a new focus on this. So here's a really quick question, which I think is a good one. What is an on-the-spot incentive? Because that came up as a recruitment tool. Gordon, can you give an example?
Sure. Somebody who gets a zero violation, or, you know, gets a roadside inspection, a full inspection there, not just a spot check, and scores well, you know, gets, you know, that some sort of incentive on his next check.
Okay. Here's a question I think I know the answer to. Has anybody thought of giving also a bonus incentive program to current employed drivers to attract other drivers? Like for every driver you get a bonus. I'm guessing that's probably already in place in most places, wouldn't it be?
Referral bonus.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, any company out there today is got to have something in there, because you can have the best recruiters in the world. You can have, you know, the best marketing team in the world, but the guys and gals that are out there every single day spreading the word are the ones that are meeting up in the truck stops and in the rest areas and the parking places that are telling each other. You want to get your word out, tell a driver, and they'll tell other drivers, and you want them to be able to market your company, and the referral bonus is huge. We've got a dynamic referral bonus, and that's important for companies to have.
Okay. What is the best non-monetary incentive that has worked for you? And I'm going to not so much answer it, but I did want to note that FreightWaves broke a story the other day that U.S. Express is now offering college education at an online university called Ashford University, not only to its drivers, which is not really new. I guess some other places do that, but also to their children. And U.S. Express will pay for 2 people at a time to be taking courses on this online university. And the other thing is, it's not a reimbursement program where, you know, you got to lay out all the money up front and then you get it back later. And you know, when I talked to Eric Fuller in doing the story, you could really hear the excitement in his voice. And from what I, this appears to be very much of an out-of-the-box step. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Mike or Gordon, but what are your thoughts on that? And also to the question of what the questioner said was, are there any sort of non-monetary things you can cite that are particularly effective? Gordon?
Yeah, I think that there's a whole pile of them, and I think from the standpoint of talking to people over time and saying what they thought had worked the best, if you can touch the family at home, because it provide them some additional recognition, because they're part of a driver's life that is on the short side of his time, and a lot of he comes home tired and isn't home enough. So if you can touch the family, things that recognize the wife's role in keeping the things at home rolling while he's on the road, those things go a long ways. I think the idea of providing free college is brilliant. Once again, touches the family, and I would guess that it's a very small percentage of drivers out there who feel like they're doing an adequate job of providing for a college education if their children want one. So I think it's brilliant.
All right, I'm going to ask one that I know is very controversial. Are sign-on bonuses effective or seen as desperate or a gimmick by drivers? Do sign-on bonuses attract the right type of driver? Boy, you really can get into a nice discussion on this one. We don't have too much time, but I know within the market, this is one that people debate all the time. So, Mike, would you like to take that one?
Well, sign-on bonuses are definitely a double-edged sword at Fraley and Schilling, and the way we've done it, and we've seen it all over. For instance, right now we have a $10,000 sign-on bonus. Now, that doesn't mean that when the driver's done with orientation, we hand him a check for $10,000. We certainly don't do that. It's something that's gauged out over time and spread out to ensure not only our efforts of engagement but also of retention. But you've got to stay competitive, and I've traveled a lot of miles, and I see a lot of very creative billboards out there for other companies that depict a lot of money, somewhere in upwards of $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 when it's all in. Drivers view it as a tool, and where you really got to watch it is your existing drivers, because the driver come in 20 years ago, he may not have gotten a sign-on bonus, and then all of a sudden he sees all of these new individuals coming in, and they've received that. So it's something you have to balance, and can definitely be viewed in a negative connotation. But as Gordon mentioned in his analytics, that it's something that's very much a part of the industry at this time.
All right, we're going to try to squeeze in one more. We do like to keep on time, and we're at the hour. Trucking is a service business. So if a shipper is willing to pay a bit more for higher OTD, can you define that for Mike?
I don't know what OTD is. And OTR is over the road.
Yeah, okay. I did not see an incentive for OTD. Gordon, do you know what the questioner might be asking when he says OTD?
I don't.
I mean, okay. Okay, well, we're going to have to pass on that. So you stumped us, apparently. So you can also connect that bonus with an anniversary bonus for the driver that he attracted. After every year that the attracted driver spent in the company, the mentor gets a bonus that he will be interested in keeping contact with that driver and sure he gets all the support he needs to stay in the company. Very interesting approach. So instead of the one-time payout, if you get somebody, you care that person stays and sticks around.
Yeah, Gordon mentioned it earlier. We call it a longevity bonus. It's something that we've looked at, we've talked about, we've not implemented yet, but it's something that more and more you're seeing in the market.
Okay. I wanted to, just before we close, I wanted to mention something that when we talked about when we were planning. There was a gentleman by the name of Herb Stein, who was the chairman of Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford's Council on Economic Advisors. He might be more famous for being the father of Ben Stein, the comedian and actor of Ferris Bueller fame. But also, he had a law. He said if something can't go on forever, it won't. And, you had 40 years of declining wages. Gordon, some of those numbers that you put in were rather staggering in terms of how trucker pay has done relative to inflation. Are we at the bottom of a cycle, of a 40-year cycle? It can't go on forever, so it won't?
If you're asking me, John, I think we're at a seminal year this year. I think things are turning around. We've had a glut of capacity and a glut of drivers since 1980. and when we decontrolled. And we've worked that off. And we'll also, competition has driven the rates to a point where for probably the last 20 years, the carrier had almost no leverage in the negotiation. His job was to continually decrease costs so they could continually decrease freight rates. We're at a period right now where we're probably going to get well as an industry because we're just flat short drivers, and we can buy more capacity. Problem is we don't have anybody to drive it, the truck that increases that. So we got to get smarter with technology, and I think that's going to solve a lot of problems. But on the other hand, I think over time we're going to see wages go up supported by freight rates, and the freight rates will precede increasing driver pay. So I think it's a good time to be looking at driving as a career. We need to communicate that effectively. We need to attract people to this industry because they think young person, because it's a technological miracle only exceeded by that of a jet fighter. And quite frankly, if you look at a cab today, it's getting more technology than ever before, and we need to sell that hard.
Right, and that's one of the things that you hear. You look at these numbers for Class 8 vehicles, and they're record-breaking. And then the question becomes, who's going to drive them? And one of the things that comes up is, well, the same people who are driving the older trucks today. But that's a big retention tool, is to be driving the absolute top-of-the-line truck with all this great technology. Would you agree, Mike?
Absolutely, yeah. The pay and benefits and what kind of truck am I going to drive? Those are the three things that drivers ask on the phone when you're in recruiting is very much, what type, what model, and what technology. Very much something that they're interested in.
All right, everybody. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you again to our speakers, Gordon Clent and Mike Paz, as well as our partners at Smart Drive. Look for the ebook announcement in the coming weeks to explore the detailed full survey findings. And don't forget to register for Market Waves 18, which will take place in Grapevine, Texas. That's just north of the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport on November 12th and 13th. This is the premier event for the freight industry and will include a number of keynotes, panels, demos, and networking sessions that you will not want to miss. To learn more or register, visit www.freightwaves.com/MarketWaves18. We appreciate all of you listening in today, and we hope that you will join us again soon. Thank you very much.